Welcome to podcast
welcome. Thank
number
you. Welcome.
2.
Yeah, welcome.
Number 2. It's sort of number 2. Just funny story that you guys don't care about, but it's actually number 3.
Number 3, yeah.
Why is it number 3, Patrick?
Because our tech guy.
Who's our tech guy?
Trevor Thiessen. He's in the house. He's part of the peanut gallery today, which is really great.
I sure am, regrettably, apparently. So,
Hey,
You're
welcome to podcast number 2. We are going to dive right in.
Yeah, head first. Let's do this.
Really looking forward to this discussion because this is really just right where I'm at in life. In a lot of the conversations we've had about COVID, this has been one of the big ones.
There's been a lot. It's amazing, actually, how much we've talked about COVID and pandemic and lockdowns and politics and family and faith. And man, it's been wide ranging and seemingly never ending.
Right.
have you ever thought about how you say COVID kind of weird? You say Cove-ed as in like phys ed, like education. Cove-ed, not COVID.
I'm big into sports. What can I say?
Whatever.
Should I be like, you want me to change it so it's like COVID? COVID.
Yes.
COVID.
That's exactly what I want you to do.
COVID.
Not
COVID.
Cove-ed, okay?
COVID.
Okay, well, there you go.
Ed here.
If you get to the end of this podcast and you're like, we've learned nothing, that is a lie.
Not
you
true.
have learned that it is not COVID.
It's COVID.
COVID.
Did not think I was going to get a grammar lesson midway.
That is a good segue. That is a good dad moment from Trevor.
Yeah, very good dad
Teaching
moment.
his
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
So we are talking about parenting.
Yes.
Parenting. So this whole pandemic has been a challenge for us. But my goodness, as a parent, it's brought a whole nother level of emotions to the whole thing. And so much of it has to do with what your kids are being robbed of or they're missing out. So many of the discussions about school and how you feel about how that's gone. And so overall, this conversation, while we're going to end at 30 minutes today, could really be a couple hours long because as a parent, there's a whole new dynamic. There's so much more to it. It's so funny when I think about stuff we went through in our teen years. And I mean, yeah, you were younger, but at the same time, you also had nobody that was dependent on you.
Yeah.
There wasn't like if something happened, you're just like, well, I screwed up. But now you're trying to navigate this for your kids, and you're going, okay, well, what is the world going to be like for them growing up? And so there's a whole nother level. So we wanted to spend a couple minutes today on parenting. And so I want to start with kind of setting a little bit of a tone for where we were at during all of this. So we're both dual income families. My wife is a teacher. I work here at the church. And so during the first lockdown, at least, then she took a leave of absence and stayed home to teach the kids because we found that our kids actually weren't quite ready to do school by themselves. Right? And that was a big part of our challenge was our kids at the age they're at. What are you supposed to do? They're not mature enough where they're going to sit there for 7 hours of the day by themselves with no parental supervision and watch
With the screen.
Here's
the screen. Go ahead, watch your class.
Right. So that was a challenge. That's where we found ourselves. What about you?
For us, we found ourselves, Juanita was deemed to be essential. We lost childcare, and we were kind of caught between, I think where a lot of parents could relate to, having to figure out what to do with your kids when you're not really supposed to have them out of the house because you're going to throw yourself into quarantine and not knowing what to do with education, not knowing what to do with, it was very, as a structure guy, it turned everything upside down.
Right.
And really, it made it incredibly difficult to know where I was supposed to be and how I was supposed to be. One of the things that we've often talked about is, being present where you're at. And man, did that ever make it difficult for me. I like to have things set up in order, and things were just so disordered.
Right, and so by structured, one of the things I found out about you, because we've only known each other for about 6 years now, something to that effect, but you would have the same thing for breakfast.
I've been married 9.
Single... Well, did I know you the first 3 years? Did I really know you? Really, you've been married that long?
Yeah, man.
Oh,
this is 10. This August is 10.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to write that in my notes. 10,
yeah, put that down. Remember you helped out with the whole proposal thing?
I'm part of the reason that happened.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it, actually.
Absolutely welcome. But you were very routine. You had a cinnamon...
No, every morning for breakfast I would have the exact same thing. So,
but it was a bagel and it was cinnamon raisin, was it not?
It was cinnamon raisin bagel with egg and ham and cheese, and I did that for like years. I loved it. It was awesome. Why do anything different? Especially leading into
the same thing.
Yeah.
So when you say structured, because this kind of gets into what we're going to talk about, because what we'd like to talk about is how our kids struggled during the pandemic. The reality is we parents struggled. And one of the things that we'll circle back to, and I think that's really important to note, is some of our own struggles really began to play out. And for some people, this was a challenge for a whole different reason. So for you, one of the biggest struggles was this the structure that you liked. So talk to us how that kind of played out.
Well, just basically speaking, going to work in the morning and coming home at night. Your one kid is in daycare, your other child's at school. Things are set up, things are organized. Everything is, all the pieces are where they're supposed to be.
Right.
That's great, perfect. Breakfast, same thing, 10 years straight. So we're great. Everything works, and then from there you can kind of go off into the fringes of what you need to do and what you need to accomplish and the variables. But and then when pandemic hit, it just flipped it upside down because we lost all those things that were part of those structures, and then how am I going to navigate not being able to go to work because I need to be doing childcare, and then how do I pass that off? But then how do I also do schooling when I have one kid not in school, one kid in school, and it's just nothing is. I couldn't feel like I could figure out a system to any of it, and I didn't know if I should. And I was left kind of in this in-between place, and I found that really difficult. I found it incredibly hard mentally, incredibly hard emotionally, because I felt like I wasn't valuable anywhere. I wasn't, nothing was being accomplished anywhere.
Right.
And that put me in a place where, I think if things hadn't changed, it would have been a lot darker.
Right.
Not knowing how to come out, but
Right, and to kind of put that into short words here, you really struggled because you couldn't spend the time at work that you needed to, and both of us love being here. We love our time, and during COVID, we faced massive challenges, as many industries did, but as a church, we faced massive challenges, and so you felt like you were leaving us in the dust because you weren't really here, but then when you're home, because you're so stressed about us here and work and all that, so it felt like you were just basically a failure everywhere.
yeah, and I can definitely relate to my second child who likes to win.
Yeah.
And feeling like I can't get a win and wanting to fight for a win and no matter what, wanting to make it happen.
Yeah.
It just really put a lot of extra stress. And again, because we didn't know what this was going to be, it just I ended up staying in a place instead of making a decision to just pick one and then kind of work from there.
Okay, so let's use that as a transition because this last lockdown was a lot different.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, and I found it actually kind of interesting because I don't know what you guys all felt or experienced, but I actually thought this second lockdown might be worse. And now looking back, I think it actually was, for us at least, it was a lot better. And I think some of the things that we learned last year really helped us get through this lockdown better. Because I know when we first got the announcements about the lockdown, there was some anger in the church office, and we were frustrated. But now coming out of it and being on the other side, I think we navigated it well. So, but specifically going with, so this first lockdown, you really struggled. You felt like a failure all the way around. What are some of the things that you changed, and what did you kind of do to get through this next one in a better place?
I think as we saw it coming, made the decision as we were entering into it that I wasn't going to stay in between. That I was going to pick some place that I could be present in, and then be able to pour myself into that and figure out a structure that would work for both my kids and their education and their care, but also for me to be able to somewhat engage, at least in a way that would take some of the pressure off here for you guys as we were working. So what we did is we decided to, like most parents, unfortunately, my employer being very flexible, we started our own little, we called it the Moore Ave Underground School. Shout out to Jack and the Moore Ave Underground.
So you live right next to them.
I live right
so
next to them. Yeah, they're awesome. I have awesome neighbors. They're fantastic people. I mean, you can help them out by downloading their one of their singles off of iTunes. It's called Red. Moore Ave Underground Red. Great song. You guys will like it. I get to hear it all the time.
Well,
so that's one of the benefits of being next door. I get the music for free.
I just wonder, who is louder, you and the kids or the Moore Ave? Like, was there a competition at that stage, or?
I don't know. They're very good on their sound control, and they try really hard to be reasonable neighbors as they follow their dreams and their journey.
100%, it's awesome.
And I think it's a fantastic thing. But I'm sure there are times where I'm I'm making a lot of racket with renovations and everything else. So
Yeah.
we compete on a very good level. So that's awesome.
Got to
So-
win at everything, right? All
so
right.
I cheated. I stole their name for our underground school, and basically invited a couple of the nephews, people that were in our bubble before we went into the lockdown,
Right.
and we're with our kids inside of their cohort at school, and basically decided to do the video teaching to them and make my mornings about making sure my kids stayed up to date on their education with their cousins, and just being able to move forward and just help out family that way, but also help me out mentally by not being so divided and being present in one thing at a time that I could control. And by control, I mean pandemic, you're out of control.
Sure.
But by allowing myself not to be in multiple places at one time, it allowed me for my own emotions and my own mental health to be stable.
Right.
So I felt like I was doing something productive and positive for my kids, for my family. And then that also allowed me, because my wife's employer was flexible, she would take over in the afternoon. And that allowed me to come to work and work later into the evening, so I could also be productive at work.
Right. So now some people listening are going to go, well, my employer doesn't allot me that. And so I think that's where part of what we really had to learn is you can control only what you can control. And in some of this, and I know for a lot of the families we talked to, they were both dual income, but their jobs did not allow that. You cannot frame at home.
Yeah.
Your construction trades cannot, carry your kids with you. So there was a lot of trades that really struggled with some of this. And so we don't want to make it in any way, shape, or form seem easier than it is. Just do exactly what we did. But I think that's not the point. I think the point that we really discovered, because both of us parent somewhat the same, but our personalities are incredibly different.
Yeah.
And so the way we responded was incredibly different. But one of the things that we really learned was something you alluded to before, and that is try to find a way to be present where you are. And I think during this pandemic, a lot of our the bubbling up of discontent in our lives definitely played a lot. You're not really happy, and so when you're at home, you're thinking about what you could have done at work, and you're dreaming of this, and when you're at work, you're dreaming of the weekend, and there's this constant flow of, I'm not really happy where I'm at right now. We don't stop to enjoy. You're always thinking about the next thing. And so now all of a sudden we're stuck in a place where everything else has kind of been stripped away.
Yeah.
And there is no next thing because you're locked down.
Yeah.
You're unless you're deemed essential, a lot of people weren't even leaving for work.
Yeah. There's a lot, even in our neighborhood, there was a lot of the families that normally would be heading off to their jobs were now remotely working.
Yeah.
And doing so with their kids at home. And you could definitely tell that in many ways it created a lot of additional stress and made it difficult. And in many ways there was also some pretty cool benefits that we started to see come from that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about that, one of the things that we definitely learned was, and I want to take out of this, is I want to be more present when I get home. And I think watching you and listening to you kind of inspired me, because I was thinking about that too, that, you, by starting the school, you gave me the opportunity to go to work. But because I was so busy at work, then often when I got home, I was still stressed about work. But I think that's one of the biggest lessons is trying to be present exactly where you are. Because your kids don't know what they're missing out on. And part of our stresses are, your kids are missing out on tournaments. My kid is, this summer is supposed to be their 12U Cooperstown tournament. This is a huge tournament, a huge thing. You go to Cooperstown in the States, Baseball Hall of Fame, you have this, amazing. Well, I know what he's missing. He doesn't. And so now I'm stressed and I'm rattled about things. But again, what are the things you can control? And then focusing on some of that. So let's get back to a little bit. Stop hitting. I get too excited when I preach. So I'm very animated. So one of the things that we talked about with this, how do you stay healthy under all the pressure? So we talked about being present where we're at. We've talked about some of the importance of routine and some of that, but there was this constant pressure. There was this constant anxiety that we've been living under now since March.
Yeah, it's been a year now. We've talked about the lead into when this all, kind of like when the pandemic dropped,
if
we're going to say it that way. And when all of a sudden things started to shut down and you don't know when it's going to just ratchet up even worse. And it feels like the level of fear has consistently ratcheted up, and the level of worry has consistently ratcheted up, and the precautions and the restrictions and the approach has, it's been and you just don't know how that's going to impact your tomorrow.
Right.
And being a structure guy, when we set off on a course, okay, I would rather, and I mean, we've talked about that, I would rather, over Christmas time, I would rather that they would have just shut everything down and let's do 3 weeks of just absolute shutdown, nothing. Just close it right down, than to have kind of like that. Well, we're maybe we're coming back. Maybe we'll open the doorway. Maybe this kind of variable. And I think for me, one of the things that helped kept me grounded all this is making sure that the important things in life, I mean, and I don't want to discount people that they're business owners that have lost everything. And they didn't have a business because they were looking to be rich. A lot of them just have a business because that's how they support their family.
Right.
So when I say keeping the important things, those things that are the ones that keep you grounded, I think family, for me, making sure that, the time that I'm spending with my boys is connective, and it's, and growing, and, asking them the questions that as a dad, I might not ask, taking them to places that, you can do in a pandemic. I've told you about the different car rides we would take, and going to look at farm fields and seeing, enjoying,
if you ever get the opportunity to go for a car ride with Patrick, especially during either harvest or planting, you're going to learn a lot about farming.
Yeah.
I would never thought about this. I live in Mount Salem, so I drive by these fields all the time. Then all of a sudden Patrick's driving. He's like, what do you figure that crop is? I'm like, I have no idea. I've literally never looked over there at carrots. So
it's one of those things that my dad used to do as we would drive around.
Right.
My dad would take us for Saturday morning car rides. And I didn't know that until I was actually a dad, that he was doing that to get us out of the house so mom could do things around the house and not feel like we were the constant pressure in her life as boys. But he would always share with us his farming experience. So now when I drive around, I kind of do the same thing with my boys, just out of what I learned from my dad. And I wanted to translate some of that to my kids.
Yeah.
I think making sure that they get a piece of who my dad was through me. They might not even know it, but I know it because I can see it, and they talk about it when we drive now, and they ask me what those crops are. And that's kind of a cool thing to be able to have that opportunity. I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity outside of this crazy situation that we're in.
Right.
So I think as a parent, making sure that those things stay the important things. Like, I might have to put renovations off for years. I might have to, slow down. We can't go on a trip unless you want to be locked down or pay a lot of money. And we just don't have that. But I could still go for a car ride with my kids, or go for a walk around the block, or I could still show them, the rabbit tracks in the snow. And, we can follow them and see if we can find the little bunny.
Well, I think one of the things that has maybe been revealed, and I think for those of us who have traveled a decent amount, which we have, I've seen a lot of parts of the world where what we have is unreal to them.
Oh, yeah.
And the things that we have lost now, when I think about Harry and Susanna, and as they start telling us more and more about Kenya and what the norm is there, you begin to realize how privileged we are. And a lot of the things that my kids are losing are, don't get me wrong, they matter, but they're very first world things.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that maybe we have forgotten is to be grateful. And as this began to continue on, you began to go, well, I just took for granted that I could have any job I wanted, or I could start my own business. I took for granted that, I could drive wherever I want, fly wherever I want, do whatever I want, because I'm one of the haves.
Yeah.
And so as much as I love our life, I do think this lack of gratitude has made it incredibly hard. When you think about the opportunities we still have, even during the lockdowns, you could go outside. There's so many things you could still do, and the government made sure of that. There was loopholes all over the place. You were not locked in your house permanently, at least not where we live.
Yeah.
Now, maybe we're lucky, and I'm speaking, and other people who are going to be in some big downtown area going, well, that wasn't our experience. Well, for us out here, it certainly was. Go for a drive to the lake. Go for, there were some parks we could walk through. There's all those kind of things. But when you lose sight of gratitude, it has such an impact. And I know, so you're thinking, okay, well, we're supposed to be talking about parenting, but so much of our ability to parent in a crisis is actually getting ourselves into a place where we can actually be good parents.
Yeah, I think remembering that your child might have had a rough day doing their homework, but they're healthy and you have a loving relationship with each other. I think that's an important perspective to keep. I think it's an important perspective to remember that even though they might be disappointed that they don't get to go do that thing. I remember for the first few months, all the playgrounds were closed down. Well, my kids were like, why can't we go down this slide? Because of the virus, right? We can't do it. We're not allowed to. You know, there's fencing up everywhere, and they were just confused. But then that gave me the opportunity to teach them about rocks and sticks and ponds and to be able to go for walks on trails and to look at life a little bit differently than just here's a slide.
Right.
There's so many other things that you can enjoy too, and we can be glad and thankful for that. You know, download an app on your phone and it has bird sounds onto it, and then, you know, listen to the sounds and see if you can get the birds in the forest to talk to you and have your boys, you know, be totally engaged in that. I mean, it's really cool stuff. My peanut gallery's laughing at me right now.
No, it's good.
Where did that come from?
No, bird watching is good.
Yeah.
No, all of us do that. It's really good.
Yeah.
We think for seniors, everyone should do.
Shout out to Colin. Shout out to Colin. Yeah, whatever.
No,
That's
bird
okay.
watching is good.
That's
I
okay.
should watch my jokes. I love the Blue Jays, the Cardinals, and a bunch of other baseball
wow.
teams. So, okay, so we talked about gratitude.
Yeah.
But then there's another thing that I've seen. So, again, this goes back to mental health. So I think this is where I struggled with, is not getting lost in bitterness. And what I wanted to say by that is not getting lost in anger over how the government's handling it, how others are handling it. And there's almost a couple different lenses you can have. And the one is that lens of just anger. And I felt like that was a big struggle we had probably about the middle of summer and leading into the fall, where I was just angry at the way the government was handling it. And I was frustrated. And so then that anger was a constant tension then that I would take home. And then I think that where I see it, at least in Elmer, where this play out, you had to take it out on someone.
Yeah.
And so in Elmer, it ended up being you would take it out on anyone who disagreed. And so if you're for masks, anybody who was anti-mask was just anger. If you were for the protocols, anyone who was anti, it was just anger. And so there's this tension, but it was a bit silly. Like, I'm so angry over Doug Ford's choice that I end up missing everything. And for me, at least, one of the biggest things I saw was that I stopped being empathetic to other people's struggles.
Yeah.
When you think about how hard it was for us, like people, I know we make all the pastors jokes. You guys only work 40 minutes a day or a week anyway. Ha ha ha. And I always say, well, suckers, you guys have to work 40 hours. So anyways, but going from speaking to my church family and to, you know, when they'd gather on a Sunday morning, you to connect with people and you're engaged by that and you're fired up by that, to just speaking to an empty sanctuary and a camera was incredibly hard.
Yeah.
But when you're bitter, you can't give empathy to anyone. You can't empathize with the police officers. You can't empathize with the people who are opposed to things. You can't empathize with anybody because you're just so caught up in anger.
Yeah, there's really nobody that was put into an easy position by this whole situation. Very complicated. Like, as a parent, during the first lockdown, I mean, it was really cool to see community come together and do things that were just to support community. I remember teddy bears and stuffies being put out in windows.
Yeah.
So I would take my boys for long walks all over town just to count the teddy bears, and that gave us something to do. And you never knew when you were going to see a new teddy bear in a new window at a house that didn't have one before, as people started catching on to doing these little things that actually mattered a lot. And I think as a parent, that was cool.
Yeah.
It allowed us to be together instead of focusing on what could keep us apart.
Right.
And I think that's an important thing to remember, is that we can do amazing things together. You can support parents even if you're past your parenting stage or you're not quite into that.
Right.
You know, it was beneficial.
Right.
And I think the tensions that have simmered,
Right.
and I think the frustrations over, you know, the lack of, there's so many things that we could talk about on that.
Right.
I think boiled over to where we started focusing on the things that were keeping us apart or what we perceived to be hurting us. And that's almost in in a very similar way. It's almost like the park being closed that hurts me,
Right.
because my kid can't enjoy life the way I want them to enjoy it. And yet, if I have a right framework, I can focus on the trail and the sticks and the rocks and the ponds and the birds rather than the slides. I think those are important things to remember. And it's hard.
So as we kind of wrap up, because we're going to quickly run out of time here, but as we kind of wrap up, I want to kind of highlight a few things. So being present, I think, in controlling what you can control. To me, that's a big thing that we have had to learn. You can vote. You can do all those things. You can protest, civil disobedience, all that jazz. but controlling the things you can control. And sadly, one of the only things you can control is you. And I think as a parent, that's been one of the hard lessons. And our kids, when they're coming home, at least I found with my kids were more worked up when we were worked up.
Yeah.
My kids actually, when school started again now, a couple of them were like, man, we kind of liked being home with you guys. And so for the kids, I think what they're looking for is that stability. And I think you can't do that if you're trying to control everything else. Control the things that you can control. I think finding gratitude in what you still have and what you're still able to do, and being as empathetic as you possibly can with those around you. And the last thing we wanted to say, and I want to spend the last few minutes on, was being kind to yourself as a parent. If I've learned anything about being a parent, it is that I am not as good as I had hoped I was. I've made so many mistakes, and you look back and you go, man, when my dad would yell at me, I would be like, I'm never going to do that. And then you catch yourself in moments where you're like, what was that?
All of a sudden, I understand why my dad would yell at me.
Right.
As a parent, now I'm like,
I've actually multiple times now gone home to my parents and just said, I'm so sorry. I'm so, because it's hard. But I think, especially during this pandemic, one of the things that I've learned about crises and trauma is that everybody responds differently.
Yeah.
And so two people see the exact same thing, and one person, this becomes a traumatic thing that they spend the rest of their life dealing with, and the next person's like, it just didn't affect me. And I think for parenting, often we kind of look the same way. Well, for some of you guys, this pandemic has driven you almost into a depression. For some of you guys, it's been incredibly hard. For some of you guys, the dual incomes, you feel like you failed on every level and going through a really rough time. One of the things that we really wanted to try to drive home is to be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I think that was coming from that first lockdown, remembering that my kids weren't ruined from it.
Right.
And the fact that they had things pulled away from didn't ruin them. The fact that, it didn't wreck who they could become.
Yeah.
And to remember that it's okay if you lose your mind once in a while.
Sure.
And by that, I mean, if you have a track record of loving and caring and taking care of your family and working hard as a parent to do those things, and to when you mess up, the kids, they forget it so fast,
Right.
because all they want is mommy and daddy back, and that's what matters to them.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think it's really cool that love does that.
Yep. No, I think when we look back at our parents, they weren't perfect.
No.
But I loved my parents. They knew that they loved us, and it had a huge effect. And I think for this too, maybe the last couple of months have been really hard. Maybe you feel like you failed more than you succeeded, but don't get stuck there. Be present where you are and you're today. And so if you feel like you've done a great job, I mean, high five. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And we really hope you feel that.
Hats
as
off
a
to
mom
you,
and dad, you guys are so important, especially those doing single parenting. Good night.
Ooh, man.
If you are a single parent during this, you guys are doing a tremendous job. But keep going. Be present where you're at. We got to learn from the past, and we've tried. I mean, both of us, we've talked at length about doing better and not getting so caught up in some of this stuff, but it's not easy. No. And even knowing this and even having this conversation, there's things that we need to improve on. And so I think for the parents listening, as you're going through this, you work on it day by day. And you do the best you can, and when you fall short, you give yourself some grace.
Yeah, I think giving yourself grace is so important. And just remember, the love that you show covers a lot of the mistakes that you make.
Yeah, 100%.
And you will be remembered for being loving more than you'll ever be remembered for the mistake.
All right, so our time is running low. Man, hey, thanks for the conversation. I have appreciated the journey together over the last year. So with that, if you guys have any questions, comments, this may be pre-recorded, but we are going to be checking those. Engage, send them in, be the Peanut Gallery, and we will see you next time.